Friends, if you want to hear something interesting, you are in the right place. We're talking about a natural and unique approach to chronic illness and chronic pain. Before I say more, I want to take a second to thank you from the bottom of my heart, all of those who have left a review on our podcast. Anytime I see a new review posted, it just makes me so happy. And it's one way that we can get our podcast out to more people. If you haven't left your 5-star review yet, there are some links down in the show notes to make that easy for you to do, and we would so appreciate it. Today, I'm interviewing the beautiful Grace Secker. She is a psychotherapist and chronic pain coach. This episode was truly fascinating to me. Grace found healing for her own chronic pain and illnesses by retraining her brain, and that's what she helps other people do today. We talk about the cellular effects of trauma and emotions. We talk through some misconceptions about trauma, and we talk about how her work with healing the nervous system is really work with healing your relationship with yourself. If you or anyone you know is dealing with chronic pain, illness, any other disorder, things like depression or anxiety, listen in and really think about if this therapy might be useful for you. Welcome to the Daily Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Meredith. I've led my family on a transformative health journey for over a decade, and now I help other families do the same. This is a place where busy moms can learn about healthy living. I hope that what you learn here helps you feel empowered to take the next step in your family's health journey. Hey, Grace. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I have heard a little bit of your story, and I'm really curious to hear more and what really, gave you such a heart and passion for counseling and helping people the way you do now. So would you mind sharing that with us?
I'll give the highlights. It could be a long and short story. But essentially, I got into therapy. I wanted to become a therapist ever since I was probably around 15. I very gratefully and thankfully was put in therapy as a teenager. After dealing with lots of depression and anxiety and some trauma. And it truly saved my life. I really valued it. I was seen, I was heard. I was even in a girls' team group that really helped and just felt that sense of belonging. And I was like, I want to be like her when I grow up, my therapist. And so I did. I went straight into undergrad and graduate school for psychology and jumped into being a therapist and a more traditional talk therapy psychology way. And so that's the basics of my training. And really so much of what I do is, I have gone through a lot of different traumas and healing in my own life, and I bring that into helping other people. But the reason why I specialize in more chronic pain and chronic illness type specialties now is because I also dealt with a lot of chronic pain and illness, and it actually started in grad school. And I didn't connect the dots at all. I had no idea. We never talk about this in school. I don't know if they do now. I don't really think so. But we didn't talk about the mind and body connection. We didn't really. A lot of our medical community is either the mind, mental health, or physical health. And there's not a lot that we're bringing together. It's starting to be more, right? There's a lot more of that out there. But we never really learned that. So I dealt with a lot of chronic pain until one day, I'm going from doctor to therapist to chiropractor to anyone who would help me. And I ended up at a naturopath, and thankfully he saw me for a while and then was like, I think you need to go see this psychologist that I know. And I was like, psychologist? Still, again, I was in school for this, and I was like, well,
right.
I'm like, okay, sure. I'm not opposed to that. So I did. And within about 6 months, 90% of my pain went away. And she specialized in what I specialize in now. But the interesting part of this is that after that time period, I just kind of went on with life. I didn't really think too much about that. I didn't think that I could be a therapist like that. I went into just other kinds of traditional therapy. Part of working with chronic pain is to not focus so much on the physical body. Meaning don't think so much about it. Don't be in your body in that pain. And so things would pop up and I would just kind of move away from it. Then fast forward a few years later, I started my own practice, my own business. I had other relationship difficulties and things going on in life. And I started developing other types of chronic illness, like chronic fatigue, gut issues, histamine issues, migraine type headaches, things like that. And I didn't recognize that I could do the same type of healing with pain. So I went through the whole medical system again. And it was over a year or two that I was in that until finally my partner at the time was like, I was having a breakdown. I was like, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm going crazy. Like, I can't do this anymore. And he was like, do you think maybe you could use that same approach that you used with chronic pain? And, when you're in that, you're like, shut up. It is real, right? Like, what? This is real. I don't need to work with it on a psychological level. Yeah. And then it hit me and I was like, oh, okay. And so I used the same practices, which I can explain.
Yeah.
And within a few weeks, some of the worst symptoms went away. And that's from that point on, I was like, oh, I have to do this professionally. Like, I have to share this information. This has to be out there. So now it's my mission to share how the mind and body, how we can really heal on a chronic physical level with the mind.
Yeah. I'm just almost speechless. Like, when I hear you talk about, like, I'm like, this is fascinating, and I have so many questions about this. Like, what is happening? Yeah. So your perspective on kind of counseling and like how you're helping people has really changed because of your own journey.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And so I know you had been through some counseling. You said you started like 15, right? As a teenager, but then you had these chronic pain issues in grad school. So what was the root of those chronic pain? Was that a trauma related thing that you hadn't really addressed before, or was it something new in your life, or why do you think that kind of popped up at that time?
That's a great question, because that's very helpful for actually a lot of people going through this. Usually especially when we're talking about a chronic physical issue like chronic pain, more often than not, it happens kind of like there's something that's like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Usually what's underneath the surface is old traumas, experiences, difficulties in life that our nervous system deems as dangerous. So it pushes away and instead gives us pain, physical pain. And usually when it comes out, it's because there's either people experience like a loss in life or undue stress, like experiencing a lot of stress in their life, or their brain and their nervous system are just like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
For me, it was the stress of grad school. I had gone through my first like huge breakup. I had moved back to my hometown, which was exciting and then also stressful. Like, it was a bunch of things all at once. Yeah. And I think my body just took it on as, hey, we're going to send you some pain, physical pain here, because the emotional stress that you're under and the other stuff you've never really dealt with, that's too hard. So we're going to give you physical pain. Yeah. And that's really what happens.
That's really interesting. Okay, so when we're talking about trauma, maybe we should kind of define and talk about what that is, because I feel like that's, I don't know, it can be a little ambiguous. People are like, so talk to us about trauma. Give us like a little class on what that really means and how that kind of, I don't know, affects different people or people differently.
Yeah. So the overall arching general definition, if you will, of trauma is the experience that your body has, that your mind has, as a result of something that's happened to you. So the trauma, and that's, I don't think that's the direct quote, but that's what Dr. Gabor Mate says. And he's if you've never heard of him, he is an amazing practitioner who talks a lot about mind and body and trauma. And so the idea is, it's not about the external event, right? It's not when we're talking about big T traumas, those are things like loss, divorce, a natural disaster, abuse, neglect, things like that. Those are the big T traumas. And it's not necessarily that event, but it's how your nervous system receives it. So our nervous system has what's called a window of tolerance. And if your window of tolerance is small and you're experiencing lots of stress outside of you in your life, wherever you are, your window of tolerance is going to say, I can only handle so much. And when all these other experiences come in, it's too much for me. And so that becomes trauma.
What
So
determines your window of tolerance? Is that different for everybody?
it shifts out throughout time, throughout our life. So, I mean, we could take this all the way back to attachment as babies, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're attuned to and a secure attachment, you can build a stronger nervous system and window of tolerance. Over time, if you have big T or little t, and I'll describe what little t traumas are, it may not be those big events, but they are experiences that your nervous system deems as dangerous. So that could be like bullying at school, or your parents not actually really paying attention to your emotions, right? Things like that over time building up means that whatever you're experiencing isn't okay. So someone that might have a lot of big emotions in life, they may have been told through society, through parents, through school, wherever, that it's not okay to feel your big emotions. That can be a little t trauma that's built up over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Let's say that's probably a misconception that people have, right? Is that trauma is just those big things.
Exactly. And so a lot of people, I mean, honestly, myself included, and a lot of people I talk to, they're like, I don't understand. I mean, maybe they've learned about the nervous system and pain, kind of have an idea. They're like, but I don't know. I don't have traumas in my life. And after we dig a little deeper, you do. And here's the thing. Trauma is a big word, right? It has a strong connotation. So don't be afraid of it. It doesn't, most of us have all experienced some type of trauma, essentially, because we're human. My life is not perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of us have experienced it differently as far as, big T, little t traumas. And then all of us have different windows of tolerance on how we're going to respond to those things, basically.
Yeah.
Someone can experience the same types of traumas, and some people will have negative effects, like, psychologically or physically, and some won't.
Exactly. Two people can go through the exact same trauma, and one person might come out of it with negative ramifications, if you will, and the other one may not, right? Depending on where you are, what your lived experiences are, how you perceive and take in the world, what your coping mechanisms are. I mean, there's so many things.
Just thinking like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy then, because, sometimes you'll go through things, with other people and everybody else seems to be fine. And you're like, I'm not fine.
Exactly. And also some people will experience things differently. So like in the moment versus a little bit later, right? I'm usually a person that it takes me a little bit. My nervous system takes a little bit to catch up. So I might seem fine in the moment. Maybe in a crisis situation, I'm that person that could take charge. And then after the fact, I'm like, whoa, okay, that was a lot, right?
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be like in the moment. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm really curious what that first psychologist did with you, like when you in grad school, when you were having that, dealing with the chronic pain. What was that like?
Yeah. So I don't think it was called this at the time, but what she's really doing and what I do now is called pain reprocessing therapy and emotional awareness and expression therapy. So what all that really means is that we are retraining the brain to stop sending signals of danger to the body. And at the same time, we're teaching our body that it's okay to feel emotions. So the reason we're doing that is because most of us, really, a lot of us, because of societal standards, have been taught that it's not okay to feel or push down, right?
Or feel some things, not others.
Exactly. And that repressed emotion literally lives in the cells of our body. If you've ever heard the body keeps the score, that's actually what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it can create this stuck place in our bodies. And then our brain says, oh, that's not okay to feel, but that energy has to go somewhere, or somehow we have to control it. And it's a little bit more acceptable to feel physical pain than it is emotional pain. So our brain says, oh, I see this part of your body that's a little, maybe there's a bulge disc in your spine, or maybe you have a little scoliosis, or maybe you had an injury in your hip. So I'm going to send a lot of danger signals, a lot of pain to those areas because it makes sense to the world to have pain there. And so you're just going to focus on that. The thing with chronic pain is that usually you don't actually have to have pain there. So there's a study called actually the Boulder Back Pain Study that shows someone with an x-ray of a spine that has I don't remember, 4 to 5 millimeter bulge disc, which is pretty big.
Yeah.
Most people think you have to have pain with that. But one person with the same exact spine has pain and one person does not. So what's the reason, right? We're supposed to have pain if you have a bulge disc. This is the whole point, is that you don't always have to have pain there. Your brain does not need to send danger signals to to your body. So the whole point of pain reprocessing therapy is to not work with the physical body, is actually to work psychologically and with emotions.
Okay.
Makes sense so far?
Yeah, it does. So can this be like if our body is how did you word it? If our body is kind of storing that in our cells, right? Our unresolved trauma and things like that, our unprocessed emotions. So it could be in a place where there is something kind of already wrong, right? You said, but could it also be something that hasn't bothered you previously?
Yeah, it definitely can. The reason why that's so distinctive is because, like for instance, myself. So I have had multiple different injuries. I mean, I have x-rays and MRIs of my shoulder, my neck, my spine, and there are different things you can point out and be like, oh, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, right? And those are the areas I used to have pain. I don't anymore. Wow. But nothing's changed physically on a physical level because we don't have to have pain in those areas. So usually you could have something dormant for a long period of time, and then high stress in life happens, something big happens, and your body says, okay, well, we have to deal with this somehow. So let's have some pain.
That's interesting. That's really fascinating. And what are some ways that you work through that? What are some ways that you retrain your brain, or is it really just processing emotions, or?
It's a combination of we call it establishing safety in our bodies. So what's happening when we're talking about the brain sending signals of danger to the body, you may have heard of your nervous system being in a state of fight or flight, right? Yeah. Instead of rest and digest. So when your nervous system is stuck in that fight or flight or freeze zone, it means that your nervous system doesn't feel safe. And it sounds kind of odd at first because you could look around. People say this all the time. Well, I mean, I'm safe. I'm not in danger, right? I'm not being abused. I'm perfectly fine and have plenty of resources in my life. But your unconscious, your nervous system, which drives most of our conscious awareness, doesn't feel safe. It's not logical. It's completely illogical, but it doesn't feel safe. And so a big part of what we do is help our bodies, our nervous systems feel safe. And that can mean anything from helping our bodies and minds learn how to relax with somatic practices, with breathing, with learning how to feel okay in a body that feels uncomfortable. One of my colleagues, Vanessa Blackstone, talks about one of her safety cues for a long time was just telling herself, it's okay to not be okay. Just to give yourself that permission.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a big part of that practice. And then also looking at, okay, what are those repressed emotions? What are those experiences in your life that have caused a lot of turmoil or trauma or difficulty that we haven't looked at before? Or maybe we have, but haven't learned how to process it.
Yeah. Is that what the psychologist did for you, is really helped you kind of pinpoint some areas that were making your nervous system feel unsafe?
Yeah, it was a lot going on at that time. So we really talked about in the moment. And one thing I didn't even mention at the time was throughout my process with her, I recognized that I had an eating disorder that I didn't know about.
Wow.
So there was a lot of rigid, controlled feeling in my body and my life because I felt very chaotic. So it's a lot of just uncovering and looking at your life, really.
Are there any other misconceptions that you think people have about, the nervous system or trauma or anything like that?
Yeah. Um, Probably that there's two states. There's fight, flight, freeze, and then there's rest and digest. So like there's this wrong zone and this right zone. And that's not the case. The case is not to go from this stuck place to this, wonderful rest and digest, peace, blissful place, right? We're not trying to fix you and cure you to be perfect. It's actually learning how to be in the imperfect, learning how to be okay with not being okay sometimes. And so a lot, like it's our nervous system, actually, it's meant to have fight and flight and freeze, right? Like there are certain times where we need that. So an example I usually talk about is, especially when it comes to pain signals, is that like when you put your hand on a hot stove, your brain actually sends signals of danger there. It doesn't happen right off the bat in the hand. Your hand feels it, sends signals up to the brain. Your brain says, "Oh, danger, danger," and sends signals back to your hand to feel, heat, pain. So you take it off. That's acceptable. We need that, right? We need those mechanisms. The problem when we get into this stuck fight, flight, or freeze space of our nervous system, our brain is sending danger signals all the time to all parts of our body. And that's
almost like a chronic state, right?
Exactly. And that could be anything from pain to pelvic pain to gut issues to long COVID to migraines. Like there's a whole slew of chronic conditions and symptoms that are what we call neuroplastic. I don't think I've termed that yet, but these symptoms are it's called neuroplastic symptoms.
Okay. So is there a limit to the extent to which this works? I mean, if for anyone that's experiencing pain, in whatever and listening, can anyone really benefit from this? Or is there kind of a limit to how much this can really help with your pain? Does that make sense?
I mean, certain conditions or a limit of...
Yes. So like, I don't know, can this help anyone that's dealing with pain, like to feel less pain? Or in some circumstances, will this not really work for some people?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes and no. So we always say that it can always help because, and I'll say this first, it can always help even if you have a condition that is not neuroplastic, that is like true, condition. Maybe that's cancer or arthritis, something like that. Mm-hmm. It can help you maybe subside that pain, those pain levels, because what we're doing is we're reducing the fear part of your brain that gets really anxious when you're in pain or discomfort. Our brain and our bodies are in such state of fear that because we don't want to feel that anymore, of course.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is reducing the fear, reducing the anxiety that comes with it. So it can always help. But yes, there are certain things that are not neuroplastic.
Right.
I'll list most, at least from the top of my head. And then I can also give a resource to a website that talks about all the different neuroplastic symptoms. But some of the main ones are any kind of like chronic back pain, spine pain, shoulder, neck, things like that. Migraines are a big one. IBS, IC, pelvic pain, long COVID, chronic fatigue. I think those are the main ones, but there's others. But it's usually, if you think about it this way, it's the conditions that are syndromes. Not all, but a lot of them that are syndromes that are just basically, it's a label that has a few different symptoms all put together. That really doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But it's just something that a lot of people experience, so they put a label on these random different symptoms that go together.
Well, there's so many times when people have chronic pain issues and they're trying to figure out how to make it better and they can't ever figure it out. Like they go to doctor after doctor and nobody can figure out why they're having this pain.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples maybe of someone that you've worked with recently that you were kind of, I don't know, just had like a really amazing outcome from?
Yes. Okay, so I had someone, I see people individually, and then I also have a group program. And there was this one person in my group program who came to us pretty much bedridden, was living in the basement of her parents' house. Was dealing with lots of pelvic pain, IC, fibromyalgia, mold toxicity, histamine reactions, was really down to eating just like a handful of foods. All of these different types of symptoms. And I talked with her. She was pretty hesitant to join the program because, I mean, I get it. Usually when you get to this point and you hear about the mind and body and these how to treat neuroplastic symptoms, you're desperate. You've gone through everything, like you just said, going from doctor to treatment, and you're trying because what else are you going to do? But you're also like just desensitized and you just don't really trust or believe anymore. A lot of people come to us like that. They're like, okay, this sounds great, but also, really? Are you really going to help me? You know, right? Yeah. So anyway, that was her. I talked a lot with her before joining to help kind of ease her anxiety. And, you know, of course, I can't 100% guarantee that you're going to be cured. But depending on who you are, I can be very confident that we can help you, you know? So anyway, she starts going through the program, starts really learning how to establish safety in her body and exposing herself to these situations that makes her pretty nervous, like eating certain foods that usually set her totally off. And I think it was within 2 months of our program, it was almost like literally over a week. She was like, I get it. Like she had that aha moment, that click. That then she was like, oh, yeah, it's not physical. It's totally psychological. It's my brain. After she'd been doing all these practices that we teach. And I mean, I haven't talked to her in a little bit, but at that time she was like, I'm pretty good. I'm moving forward. I'm living my life. And actually, I have a podcast and I brought her on, so I can link that as well.
Yeah, we should definitely link that in the show notes. I want to hear that. I want to hear her tell that story. It'd be amazing. Really rewarding. Yeah.
It's so cool to see because it's so tangible, right? I mean, you have these debilitating symptoms that are truly impairing your life. And to see someone work through that is really cool because it's empowering them. They're taking back their control that they feel like they've lost.
And was she able to kind of recognize the psychological things that were kind of causing her to her system to react that way?
It was like every week she'd come and be like, oh my gosh, I reflected on this and this happened in this past year and this happened and I'm in this like shitstorm of a place in my life, you know, and start unraveling that. Where in the beginning, she was like, I have no idea why this is happening. I don't understand. Right. Like she had no clue because you can't see it in the moment. You can't see. Right. So.
Yeah. I think especially since if you're in physical pain, you're just focused on that. You know, the physical body and what can I physically do to like fix this, right? Yeah. So it's really the psychological things happening. Obviously, your brain being part of your nervous system, and then that just sending these messages to the rest of your body, and things are kind of going haywire.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it increase when you like truly, if we're talking on a physical level, when your body's under so much stress, you go into what's called a cell danger response. And so, I mean, it's literally what it sounds like. Your cells are in danger mode, which increases your cortisol, creates havoc with your hormones. It can increase inflammation, which can increase difficulty in your organs. I mean, it affects everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Can you walk us through some of the practices that you do? Like, I know you really have a wide variety of services that you kind of like, you know, you started as just a counselor, kind of a typical talk therapy counselor, right? And you've added so many things. Can you kind of talk us through your services and really what the benefits of each of those are?
Yeah. So I've really kind of actually honed it down now, where I'm just right now, at least I'm offering 2 different services, if you will.
Yeah.
I'll say this first is that everything that I've gone through and all the trainings I've been through, I just have now meshed into how I help, right? And like what I teach.
Yes.
Really stepping into teaching these days, teaching in my group, teaching on my podcast, teaching in all different ways. I create courses for other people because I just want this information out there. So my point being, all of that comes into whatever you do with me. But right now I offer individual therapy or coaching. So sometimes when we work together, especially in the beginning, it might look a little more like traditional talk therapy because we're, kind of getting to know each other. I'm understanding you and your story. And then it might look a little bit more like I'm sharing some somatic practices or leading you through a breath work or helping you tune into your body and retraining your brain. And I have a lot of different resources that I've recorded, like modules and lessons that you can use outside of our sessions together. I also have another therapist that works with me in my practice and does all the same things I do. She's amazing. She's been such an amazing addition to our practice. And we both offer individual. And then I have my group courses. And right now I have what's called the Mind Body Healing Method, which is the program I was just discussing, where it's really specifically targeted to literally everything I've talked about this whole time, people experiencing these neuroplastic symptoms. And so you have it once you come in, you pretty much have those learning tools for a lifetime and can learn how to help yourself. That's my goal, is to help you help yourself so you don't necessarily need someone anymore.
Right. So you kind of give people tools to not just fix them, quote unquote, right in that moment, but really help them long term. Guys, you even talked about that in your story, how you kind of went back and be like, oh, I can do what I did before.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, there's so many metaphors for this. And when you're going through it and you're targeting a symptom, but really, I mean, it's a whole new way of looking at yourself in your life.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I'm thinking through things in my life, and I'm like, as you're talking, I'm thinking of different friends, and I'm like, oh, definitely sending this episode to a few people.
Yeah.
What do you mean by somatic practices? I was going to have you talk about that.
Yeah, so soma is the body. And so when we're talking about somatic practices, really at the very core, it's learning how to slow down. It's like the biggest thing. Slow your breath, slow your pace down, and pay attention to the body, which really means paying attention to the nervous system. And the very basics of that is pretty much just learning how to somatically breathe. And it's interesting to even say somatically breathe because breathing is a body practice, right?
Right.
But a lot of times, for instance, our breath, especially in a stress response, is stuck in our chest or our throat. Might be really shallow breathing. And so the first thing I usually teach people is how to breathe from your abdomen, from your lungs. Oxygen and breath is the number one quickest way to help soothe your nervous system. Think about it, like literally breath we're doing every second. And if we can use it to help soothe ourselves, it's the number one way to work on a somatic level. And so a lot of it has to do with breath and just paying attention to our internal state. Yeah. A lot of times we have no connection to our own selves.
Right.
But that's what somatic practices help us do.
Yeah. I think one thing with breath that's been really interesting for me is, you said that we breathe, all the time without thinking about it. But when you think about it, it does bring you into awareness of your body, and how you're feeling, not just physically, but emotionally as well. So that's been a really neat thing for me as I've grown. I still have a lot to learn. I'm going to say that.
Oh, we all do. I do too.
But but that's been one benefit that I have gotten even in the little that I have done, it's like, wow, this really makes you much more aware of, where you're at in the moment and how you're feeling and, what's going on physically. Like you said, I'm way up here with the tightness in my chest, so that really is a powerful free tool that anybody can use.
Exactly. And you nailed it, meaning it helps you bring yourself into the present. That's the key. We rarely live in the present. Our minds are either thinking about the future, thinking about the past. We have a hard time focusing. We're scrolling, we're eating, we're watching TV, we're talking to someone else, whatever it is, we rarely live in the present. And when we're in the present is when we can attune to ourselves and actually find peace, joy, healing, whatever it is.
Yeah, love that. What else is on your heart that we haven't covered yet as we wrap up? I just want to make sure that we haven't skipped anything that you feel like is really important.
It's a good question. I'll expand a little bit on what I just said. I think is really important that, as I mentioned, I'm still learning. I'm always learning. I'm always a student. And so much of what I have recognized over the years of doing this work is at the core of what I'm doing for myself and to help other people is to build a better relationship with yourself. That's what we all need, because more often than not, we are criticizing or judging or self-sabotaging ourselves, or we're feeling the judgment or resentment from other people. And all of that creates repressed emotion, creates shame and guilt, and we hold on to that. And then we want to distract from that because it really sucks to feel that, obviously. So really at the core of all of this is helping you have a better relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
And you can do that. We don't need as many coping mechanisms, or you can actually have better relationships in your life, or feel a little bit more safe in your nervous system, have less pain, be able to regulate your emotions. I mean, so much comes from that. And so it's, it's really what's happening.
Yeah. How would you say your relationship with yourself has changed?
Oh, man, that's a good question, because you're also getting me in a time where, over the time, like I said, I started my journey, if you will, of healing in high school, really.
Right.
But every step of the way, you learn a little bit more, right? I can think back to that time, and obviously, I had a teen brain, so it wasn't fully developed and I couldn't get that far, really. I learned some things and understood some things that maybe others didn't. But every step of the way, every hardship I go through, I learn something new. And I find a better, deeper relationship with myself. Last year, if you would have asked me this question, I would have been like, I have a great relationship with myself. I'm feeling pretty good. I've learned all the things, right? And this year, life has hit me time and time again when it hit me down.
Wow.
Universe is showing me, no, you're still going to learn some things,
Wow.
So I think that if I had never had my skills before, I'd be in a very different place right now. But I've learned a lot, and I use what I know to help me. And still, like, there are so many instances this year where I'm just like, all right, okay, I'm learning.
Yeah.
So that was a little abstract answer, but yeah.
No, that's very relatable, because, even if you get these tools and you make progress, life is still going to be hard.
Exactly.
You're still going to have things come up that you're going to have to learn how to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you learn more, you learn how to help yourself through that even better each time.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing this. This is really powerful stuff that I just know is going to help. I know you're already helping so many people, but I'm excited to share it with my audience and for whoever is listening, and just to encourage them to really take that step, especially if they're in that really frustrated place of, dealing with something for a long time and not being able to make progress or get any answers. So I feel like this is just a really hopeful episode. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
I thank you for having me on and giving me the platform to do so. I love talking about it. So
yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to today's episode on the Daily Wellness Podcast. We hope that you found it helpful for your own wellness journey. And if so, we'd love for you to leave a review. Then come back and listen for review shoutouts on upcoming episodes. For more information, check out the show notes and connect with us on our website, dailywellnesscommunity.com.